Hey guys, I'm Jake, and welcome to Kings and Queens of Miniature Castles. Alright, welcome back to another episode of Kings and Queens. Today with me, I have the honor of representing Derek Andrjeski. For a long time, I've been pronouncing it Andrjeski, and I just was told today that that's not how you say it. So, I'm sorry to you and your family.
We're in the interest of podcast honesty and transparency.
Yes,
you solved it.
That's what we're here. I'm here to formally apologize for my actions for the past 2.5 years or so. Anyways, so Derek is, he has been in the military. He is a project manager for TRANE company, which is a HVAC manufacturer here in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And he also has the dubious pleasure of being one of my mentors for over these past few years. Derek, say hi.
Hi. Excited you're here, Jake. Excited to do this.
Excited. I'm excited that you're here, Derek.
in my own house.
In your house.
Over dinner time.
I may or may not be getting steaks after this. Anywho, so Derek, let's just dive on in. So you're a program manager. Can you just give us a brief oversight of what that looks like?
Absolutely. So 42 years old. I've been in the workforce for about 20 years now. So I would classify myself as mid-career. And as a program manager at TRANE, I'm responsible for the scope, schedule, and cost of a series of projects that deliver strategic objectives. What that means in actuality...
That was like the most like military sounding. Yeah, we're gonna... Sorry.
Doesn't leave me.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Carry on.
So I take new ideas all the way from conception through market requirements. So what does the market actually want in a new commercial HVAC system? Through the design process, where we do the nuts and bolts of designing it, into the manufacturing process, where we figure out how to build it up until the time that we're ready to release it. So the programs that I run are heavily invested in resources, in capital and expense dollars in order to be able to implement. They're long duration programs, often could be possibly 3 or 4 years long, and then they represent the future of investment by TRANE company into the markets of the future. So that's what I do.
Wait, long investment programs as in like you're doing like the research and stuff for that and development for it for up to 3 years, or that they're going to be, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so the entire duration of the program would be from the time we decide to start until the time we finish. Takes us approximately 3 years, but those products will stay in the marketplace for 20, 30, sometimes even 40 years, depending on what type of product it is.
Okay, so my first question with that is something that taking like 3 years to make. Like, how do you stay motivated to like see it all the way through?
Yeah.
In any capacity.
Yeah. I think it's really hard, especially when we're in our 20s and we're 30s, to think of anything beyond a 1 month, 3 month, maybe even a 6 month window.
Amen.
And what I enjoy about program management is I actually get intensely bored in doing the same thing over and over and over again. And so the nature of these programs is that they change and they morph and they evolve and they grow and they have a percentage completion. So it feels like I'm doing something different almost every day. So the motivation in order to be able to complete those isn't as hard as you might think.
Okay, yeah. I could see how you could develop that for yourself. And then as you're doing this though, you're overseeing other people. How many people are underneath you at a given time?
Yep, absolutely. We have on our programs anywhere between sometimes the smallest teams of about 30 up to where we can have teams of 100 or 120 people.
Okay, and you're supposed to like manage and facilitate all those people and all their different like do they have thoughts and like insight into this program as well, or are they being told what to do and just implementing it?
Yeah, I think the cool thing about the way that we manufacture is it is a completely collaborative event. Everything from how we design the parts. And so from an engineering, we think of an engineer as the only one who can actually design a widget. What we often don't think about is that the person who has to actually manufacture it or figure out how to make or to build that piece all the way to the person who is in the field who may have to service it because of an annual or a routine maintenance or a problem in the field, has and should have ideas related to how that piece could best be able to be built affordably, be able to way that's built for manufacturability, to be able to design quality in at the source so we don't have or anticipate a long-term project with that. And so it's truly a collaborative effort from start to finish, even though at the end of the day, the end designer, engineer designer, will be the one who's actually drawing out and designing that part.
Okay, so 2 questions off of that.
Yep.
First one, how do you manage all of those people? Because I feel like that's just like herding cattle.
Totally.
Or cats specifically. And
Yes,
you hate
herding
cats.
engineers is even worse than herding cats.
Yeah, you've told me often how much you hate cats. So, okay, how do you herd them?
Yeah. So I'm responsible at the end of the day for the scope, the schedule, and the cost of the program. And none of the people who are on the projects directly report to me. So they all have functional leadership where we exist in a hierarchical and also a functional company, meaning the engineering reports up and through engineering, manufacturing reports up and through manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. But we are project and program focused for implementation. And what that means is that I get a percentage of time of each individual who are devoted to the project. So we work with the resource managers and we say, okay, we anticipate needing 3 designers at 50% of their capacity during this part of the project. And so we have alignment at the upfront of how much time that we're going to get from people based on how much work we estimate. But then to your question, how do we keep everybody motivated and focused on delivering scope, schedule, and cost? And we use a variety of visual management techniques and project management.
Is that a fancy word for PowerPoint?
It kind of is a fancy word for PowerPoint. You can use it in PowerPoint. Okay. You can use Excel-based. But the point of using visual management to control or to understand workflow is just to be able to we don't have time with that many people and that many tasks over that duration to talk about every detail of the project all the time. And so we want to represent and find abnormalities as fast as possible so that we can just talk about the exceptions and allow people to do over the course of their natural day to do their jobs in the best way that they know how. But when they encounter an obstacle, to escalate that in order to be able for us to help remove the roadblocks so that they can continue to do their work on the timeline and at the cost level that we're asking them to do.
Okay, so basically you're giving them free reign, basically, to they know the project, they know what they're supposed to do.
Absolutely, yep.
They have free reign to not have someone like just overseeing them right over their shoulder the entire time.
Very much so.
Okay, I can see how that could be beneficial for everyone involved.
Everyone involved.
And finally, to me, the consumer, who I'm let's be real. Actually, I'm not going to be consuming this at any point.
Absolutely not.
As TRANE is specifically creating HVAC systems for businesses, right?
In this case, I work in commercial HVAC, and so we would do things for intensely large buildings like a school complex. We would do them for hotels or for stadiums, gigantic office businesses. And so out of all of our products, the range of them, well, let me say this, the energy and energy usage is the most expensive part of owning or running a building. And so how efficient your energy system is makes a big deal related to your operating costs on an annual basis, on a yearly basis. So the more energy efficient that we can be, the better that our products work together, the less expensive it can be for a business to own and maintain their building.
And isn't there, like, not saying this as if I know anything about it,
yep.
but I could just imagine, though, there being a cap to how energy efficient something can be, though, between like resources and what like we actually know. So I guess research wise,
sure.
But so far, there's no cap in sight.
We're definitely bound by the laws of physics and the things that we do, and in any project or in any line of work, that you always have competing requirements, meaning that we want to build a unit that has no failures for the customer because that's expensive. It impacts our reputation, and if you have enough failures, then people would choose to do business with somebody else besides TRANE. But if we were to take the time to actually construct something that cannot fail, it's probably going to be too expensive in order for anybody to be able to afford it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Right. So we're always at the mercy of these constraints, and we have to try to make intelligent trade-off decisions about how much time something makes to design or to manufacture versus how expensive it is versus what the customer or the market will accept. And so that we can deliver the best product for the lowest price that has the best possible quality, knowing that achieving all those independently is one thing, but together is something different entirely.
Interesting. All right, so now I have a lot of questions now that to dovetail off of that.
Let's go.
I'd say, but before we go too much further into it, we've kind of like laid down the foundation of what you actually do, but I want to go back to the beginning.
To the beginning.
To what, basically from the time you were born to how you got to here now.
Wonderful.
I'd love to hear all of it. No, we would love to hear all of it.
I was born in 1980 in a small town. Ladysmith, Wisconsin. Population, I don't know, but it's pretty small.
Okay.
So we lived in a variety of places in northern Wisconsin. Spent a couple years in California, in Altadena, Pasadena area in the late 80s.
Were you a military family?
Nope. My dad went out and got a job at NBC Studios, where he worked on building sets for Johnny Carson. For those who remember the late night show with Johnny Carson, they would do soap operas, Wheel of Fortune. So I've actually got pictures of my childhood of sitting in Jay Leno's desk as well as spinning the Wheel of Fortune because my dad used to work there.
Now, okay. These are the things that you should tell us at the beginning of discipleship. Maybe I would have showed up.
She never knew.
Yeah. If I'd known these pictures were going to be here.
That's right.
Yeah. That's awesome, though.
It's super cool.
Yeah.
So 90s, we moved back to northern Wisconsin. I went to a private Catholic high school in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. So that's north central Wisconsin. And then went to college at the United States Military Academy for 4 years. After my time at West Point, I was in the military for 5 years as an infantry officer. Deployed once in late 2003 and 2004 in Iraq. Got out in 2007, had been married a couple years and had our first child. And we moved to Tennessee, where I tried to start a financial advising business in 2008, which for those who have any historical recollection whatsoever,
not a good year.
Not a good year to try to get people to trust you with their money.
Yeah.
So that ended in fairly short order. And so out of a need for money to pay my bills, I started as a supervisor at TRANE in 2008. At that time, TRANE was just acquired by Ingersoll Rand, a heavy industrial company. Does equipment for construction type equipment, tools is kind of their background. And I spent time in Clarksville, Tennessee, working my way up through various supervisor. I spent a time in the operational excellence department. I ran a couple of production lines before moving to La Crosse, Wisconsin, where I did the same type of work. Left for a couple years, joined the executive team of a hardwood lumber company for a couple years, and then went back to TRANE, where I've been for the last 4 years now, working in program management.
Okay. There's a lot there.
Lot to chew on.
There.
Where do you want to go first?
Let's talk about West Point. All right, it like comes up in the movies a lot. I feel like that's how I'm the most familiar with it.
Sure.
And it always seems like, oh my gosh, Jack Reacher, top of his class at West Point.
Yeah.
Jack Ryan, top of his class at West Point. Jack Bauer. You understand. There's a lot of Jack people out there.
Who are at the top of our class?
Top of the class, West Point.
My name's
like
not
a cool
Jack.
School. You're not Jack.
I'm not Jack. So
were you at the top of yours?
I was not at the top of my class.
All right. So already you're breaking the one rule I know about West Point. Okay. So what does it take to get into West Point?
Yes.
First and foremost.
So West Point's intensely selective. And so they look at the qualifications in 3 aspects. First is academically. Do you meet the minimum academic requirements in order to be able to attend? They look at your athletic achievements. So do you play athletics? Do you serve in as a team captain? And then your extracurriculars, and then your leadership potential. And with the intention being is that that West Point as the primary commissioning source for the Army, and the Army requires leaders of character, leaders of physical ability. The Army at the end of the day is very physical, and then leaders who go above and beyond, in whether that's in the community, whether that's in their sports for their teams, etc.
Okay. And you got in.
I did.
So what were your qualifications under all three of those that got you in?
I think one of the greatest things that helped me is there's not a whole lot of applicants from the state of Wisconsin, in particular Northern Wisconsin. So you not only have to meet all the requirements, but then you have to get a nomination from a senator or from a representative. And so being from Northern Wisconsin with not a lot of applicants, I was able to be the top of the big fish in a small pond, which made it very easy for me.
There you go. All right, that must have been nice though. Okay, so you went to West Point.
I did.
I'm assuming you met a lot of interesting people there, like any school. But did that prepare you well, do you think, for your experience in the Army and being an infantry officer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that not only academically was it tremendously pretty rigorous, but then there's also commissioning requirements that the Army and all the military branches have. And so those are basic tactics. Those are character and leader development opportunities. You exist very much in an Army structure, so even though you are not technically on active duty, we're still in uniform every day. We're still serving in or structured in what you would think of as hierarchical Army structures. We still have officers and enlisted personnel who serve. I think it's the oldest active post in the United States Army. So it's very much an Army environment while you're there. So the question of did it prepare me? Absolutely. I think that there's only so much preparation that can be done in the schoolhouse though until you're actually in front of troop leading soldiers.
Yeah. Okay. And all right, the goal of this podcast isn't necessarily to delve into specifically the military part of it, but did that, the experiences that you had of being deployed, of being, first off, when you left the military, what was your rank?
Yeah, I was captain.
You were a captain. Okay, what does that entail?
Yep, I was responsible. At that time, I was a company commander, and so I was responsible for the health, welfare, promotion of the soldiers that were under my command. I was serving in a unit inside of in Colorado that had been in place. I think 2ID had just moved. 4th ID had moved back from Germany at that time, and so we were responsible for training individually deploying replacement soldiers that were part of either the Army, the Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, who were going over to fill in units who are already deployed and overseas already. And so we were giving them the skill set that they needed that would be most applicable to. They needed to know how to drive vehicles in a tactical situation. They needed to be able to work with the team to move and shoot at the same time. They needed to learn and have radio skills. They needed to be able to use and work through an interpreter, etc. So we were doing that level of training for them in Colorado. And so that was a fantastic opportunity to learn practically how to give the right set of skill set based on my experience actually in war to the next group of soldiers who were going over and into.
Okay. Yeah, I can see how that could, then develop into a management style position anywhere. It's, to my understanding, and this is a big side note for the listeners, whenever you hear me say the phrase, to my understanding, basically that means I read it somewhere, or I dreamed that I read it somewhere, and it's now in my head, and it's supposedly fact to me, but that does not make it fact to you. Anywho, it's to my understanding that the Army is the best branch of the military to then push you towards a career path outside of the military. I guess it gives you the best foot forward once you leave.
I think that the the intangible skill sets that were learned are completely applicable in a management type atmosphere. I think you could make the case that but there are very few roles outside of perhaps police or perhaps FBI where you get a kind of a one-for-one swap of skill set. And perhaps the Navy and the Air Force are better or more appropriate in their, hey, I can go be an air traffic controller in the Air Force, and then I can directly do that in the civilian marketplace afterwards. Or I can be an engineer on a submarine, and now I can go work immediately as an engineer inside of some type of defense contractor who is doing that work for the Navy on behalf of the Navy. So maybe they're more applicable from an immediate skill set, but I definitely think the opportunity to stand and lead soldiers is something that applies universally in any type of management or leadership role that you would encounter or face.
And then do you think that then prepared you for the positions that you've held over the past 10 years then?
I think so. So absolutely. I think that there is a function of, if I was to give you an equation for success, Patrick Lencioni is kind of a business writer and consultant. He would say, in your hiring process, you want people who are hungry, humble, and smart. Those are the type of people that you want to hire. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. I would say that, or I would add to it perhaps, that success is a function of being likable. It's helpful to you if people you don't have to be likable, but it seems to create relationships that you're able then to use or to leverage into opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise have. That you should be motivated. So likability times motivation, meaning you're raising your hand, you're standing at the front, you're trying to, right? You're doing you're willing to put your foot forward in order to be able to try something that you may or may not be comfortable in, and then results oriented. And you have to have the ability to deliver the goods at the end of the day. And if you could do those three things, then I don't know that it matters what job you have, but you'll always find yourself in potentially increasing areas of responsibility because people like you, you're willing to try things, and you can deliver results. That's somebody who's going to progress in their career over someone who is not one of those things.
And how has are those things that you learned then, at West Point? Is it stuff that you learned while being deployed, or is it something that you've been interestedly been taught throughout your life?
Sure. I think we learned a lot about leadership at West Point, and it's both in art and science of getting people to do things that they may not want to do. So it's both a art in that that requires a little bit of, it's not prescriptive. It's fluid. You have to be able to recognize and read situations. It's science in that there is some prescription according to leadership, right? If I'm willing to put your interests above my own, if I'm willing to serve you, if I'm willing to work hard for you, if I'm willing to chastise you or give you boundaries that you may need in order to be able to do your job better, then people will respect that. And then in turn, you're able to ask or command that they do things that they may not want to do. So the art and the science of getting people to do things that they may not want to do is leadership. So lots of that is learned. Lots of that is art.
I was going to say, I think you practiced it a lot on the people that you discipled.
How would that be?
Oh man.
Any Purple Sword memories?
I just remember there being a time where, I go over to your house at the time, and I'm expecting, the usual coffee, lawn chair, and talking about specifically one guy and just lighting him up for the things that he's done. And, just having a good time with it.
Absolutely.
But then, one day I just go there and one guy is, working on a bench and doing electrical work, and we're given power tools and we're told to do stuff for you.
Are you sure you didn't have the last laugh in all this? Because you did saw the end off of my table with said power tools.
I have no idea what we're referring to. Yeah. That's what you get for trying to make me do something. I didn't want it. No, let's be real. I really wanted to use this stuff anyways, so that worked out well. But and there's other times where it's just like, all right, hey guys, back this trailer up in my alley, and there's vehicles near the area, and you're like, I just woke up 35 minutes ago. The sun's really bright on my really tired eyes. I don't know if I really want to do this. But yeah, once again, somehow all three of us would end up doing it anyways.
Absolutely.
And not to mention all three of us being in college and often showing up. I wouldn't say I was always there. You wouldn't say I was always there. But often being there 6 a.m. every Tuesday for a long time. And
for
that
years.
Yeah, for years. So I'd say, you learned the way to be able to bring us doofuses into line and make us do stuff we didn't want to do. So kudos to you, I guess. Next step, teaching me how to do that so that I can pass it on to the next generation, which I guess is what this podcast is all about. Okay, so what did you do after the Army? And how did that help you get to where you're at now?
Yeah. Lots of people who serve in the military generally have a very difficult time transitioning from the service in order to go into regular business. Some of that's related to the camaraderie and the unified purpose and of having a clear mission. Some of that's a brotherhood or the sisterhood that is formed from being in having a shared hardship. And so it's just difficult when you go into the real world and transition away from that. And I found myself very much in that place. So for me, it was 2007. I had a child and was married at the time. We'd been married since 2003, so 4 years. And I took a job at an environmental engineering company in Colorado. It was a smaller company, about 400 people, and they did work primarily with the Air Force, but they were trying to do contracting work with the Army as well. And so they were hiring people who were former Army in order to be able to start that process. And so my job was to serve as a project engineer, so helping project managers and program managers, help them serving as an aid on their role, and then managing small projects of my own. Because it worked very closely with the Air Force and the Army, it was very heavily retired military people and personnel. And my boss was a retired lieutenant colonel, sweet lady, but it felt very much like a lieutenant colonel to captain relationship, which I had a lot of disdain from the military. And so despite her being very sweet to me and very good to me and taking a chance on me, I had probably a pretty bad attitude, and I soured quickly. Some of that was I couldn't be fully utilized. I didn't really have a project management or program management skill at the time. Some of it, this was a new initiative for them, so there wasn't really a lot for me to do. So I felt that I was spending a lot of time on my computer playing flash games as opposed to doing anything that was really productive.
Yeah.
So I had a friend who was in Tennessee in financial services and killing it. And so we kept talking about, hey, you need to come out here. You need to get in financial services. You're going to kill it out here. So I began my licensing process while I was still in Colorado, did that. And then the 2008 happened as we talked about it. So left on a prayer and a dream and landed with shattering both of those. Yeah. So my next real job was taking a job as a supervisor at TRANE. So as a supervisor, I was responsible for shifts of people in the manufacturing process of also commercial HVAC. So units that would go to oftentimes hotels or sit on the top of a Lowe's or a Home Depot. We were making those types of units. So I would work generally on first shift, would have anywhere from 30 to 70 people underneath me, and I was responsible for the safety, quality, delivery, and productivity of those people in those departments. Like, I had a really bad attitude. It felt very beneath me. A lot of that was my own arrogance and immaturity coming from believing that I was all that, having a good career in the Army. Yeah. And then going on to something different that I didn't really care about, made a lot of bad life decisions, was a wreck financially, And so all of those just allowed me to manifest a whole bunch of anger and carry a really bad attitude about it at TRANE for a very long time.
Which is not great for improving in your position whatsoever. Yeah. So how did you, what was it, a circumstance or was it a situation that like kicked you in the rear and brought you up to speed?
Yeah. After about a year and a half, the leadership team in Clarksville, Tennessee, where I was at, they started a mentor program where they were taking young talent and then they would have access to the senior leaders inside of Clarksville at the time. And in the first round of people, I wasn't selected. And I was both intensely annoyed, I was hurt, but I was also like, wait a minute, perhaps I'm not showing enough from a results standpoint. Perhaps I wasn't really sure what. And
did you ask, or did you just wait?
I did. I approached a guy who I was developing a relationship with, who was one of those senior leaders, and I said, Sean, just be straight up with me because I think I need to hear it. Why wasn't I selected for the program? And he said, Derek, I think you're great, but here's the deal. There's no pizzazz about you. There's no extra effort about you. You do your 9 to 5 and then you go home. He goes, that's the truth. And I said, okay, thank you for your honesty. And then I turned and walked away. And I had to think about it for a really, really, really long time because I was both furious and hurt and upset and all the emotions that would come from receiving feedback like that. Yeah. And I didn't think that the individuals who were selected, I didn't feel like that they were any better than me or they had any skill set that was better than me. But when I could reflect honestly, I also recognized that I really wasn't applying myself. But I also learned a different lesson over time from that experiences. And that is, like, as we think about growth or we want different opportunities, we get paid to do a certain job. Often there's a job description related to that. And in return for fulfilling that, we get money. That's called our salary, or if we're hourly employees at the time, we get our paycheck associated with the hours that we put in. And you are paid to do your job. That's the handshake agreement that we have with employers. But what really separates those from the ones who are going to increase in responsibilities or somebody who's willing to take a chance on is the extra effort or the ability to go beyond what's in your job description. And generally, most people don't think like that. They think, oh, I've done a good job with the things that you've entrusted me, then therefore opportunities you should just shower me with opportunities. Well, just by the fact that most people keep their job, they're doing the things that they should be doing. And so to take a limited number of opportunities, they can't possibly give them to everybody who is just doing their job. So what separates those who get from those who don't? Generally, it's the discretionary effort that you put into the role. And that took a long time for me to learn. And but the realization it's been really clarifying over the course of my career in two ways. One is now I'm able to use that as a leveraging tool in conversations with leaders or with my boss to say, okay, this is my job. What would it take for me in order to be able to get a promotion to the next level? Mm-hmm. The other thing is that in general, because most people don't think like that, they're also not willing to do it. And the difference between someone who's putting discretionary effort in versus someone who's not may only be a 5% or a 10% difference. So you can achieve a whole bunch more just for a little bit of discretionary effort.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I have like two application kind of questions as a result of that. One of them being, like, how do you excel at your job without being consumed, like letting the job consume you? And like,
yes,
because we have the mentality that we're supposed to be hungry, and that's how we succeed, and that's how we rise above, the average people.
Yep.
I didn't like that sentence. That's how we rise above like the everyday person who's just in it for the 9 to 5.
Certainly. Which
I have another question off of that, but we're going to focus on this one right now. But like, how do you balance the two?
Yeah. I want to approach this from a couple different ways. And I don't know that balance is the right priority when you're trying to make a name for yourself in the workplace. And that doesn't mean that you have to work 100 hours in a week. But it does mean that the difference is often you have to be willing to work those hours. Okay? I think people in their 20s and maybe even in their 30s in this search for balance, which is to be fair, I also have a wife and 4 children, active in church, active in different social clubs. So balance is a very important part of my life. But you have to be willing to grind if you want to achieve a level of success in your career. Just like if you want to be happily married, you have to be willing to grind in order to be happily married. It doesn't just happen. It takes work. Mm-hmm. I read a quote just today. Marriage is hard. Divorce is hard. Which hard do you choose? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's come at it from a different way, though. Is in our day, I don't think that anybody can honestly look themselves in the mirror and say, I gave it for 110% for all 8 hours that I was at work today. So I think maybe you can. Let's even just, for example, say that you can. Okay? And if you have a peer group who is doing the exact same thing and you want to separate yourself, you have to be willing to raise your hand in order to be able to take something else on if you want an opportunity for achievement. In a peer group like that doesn't mean that you have to double the amount of hours that you work. But there is a sense of you have to be willing to raise your hand if you want to put in the time in order to be able to get ahead in an environment like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we've looked at that. Now I want to see, kind of like pick your brain on that whole mentality, because I think like one of the things that I'm sure we both agree on is that there's a time and place to like, grind for a specific part of, of your life, and then move on to the next stage, and then move on to the next stage. But, like, I feel like in the U.S., like we have such a goal orientation mindset, and we're always like looking on to the next thing. What are your thoughts on, trying to figure out how I want to say this, but yeah, what are your thoughts on like that desire and that like goal orientation versus, like if we have a bar specific spot, right?
Sure.
And then in order to stand out, we have to do some other stuff to stick out. And then other people all of a sudden start seeing it, and then they start doing the same thing, emulating, because we want people to emulate us as we succeed.
Sure.
People are going to emulate. And then all of a sudden the bar has just been raised. And then the effort then you have to then like produce to then like step out above them is more than what you had to do in the past, and then that just like continually becomes the case. How far is too far though? Like, what would you call like the cap for like what you're willing to do? And I'm sure like this varies person to person, but like even like societally, I know like over in Japan, right? Like they have an enormous, like as much as we think we have like our foot in the game of like working hard and just getting stuff done, then you go over to Japan and they're just going at it and they're putting in like 70 80 hours days, and then like spending time outside of their work environment, hanging out with their coworkers because they're supposed to, and they're kind of like trapped in that mindset like as a society. And that like as I look at that and I read about like situations like that, it seems like super unhealthy to me. Then their suicide rate is a lot higher than the average worldwide. A lot of other stuff is happening that's just not beneficial to them culturally.
Sure.
How do we prevent like us in the States from like getting to that point? Because I think we're slowly heading that way.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it has to start with changing the equation to, as opposed to defining an ever increasing level of success, as opposed to that, defining what are our needs. And when we change that equation, I think now we can prioritize. So for example, it may not make sense to continue to take promotion upon promotion upon promotion upon promotion for me to take a next step at TRANE, for example, I would, for very little pay, I would be given a ton more responsibility and a ton more to do, like actual doing.
Yep.
And because I have four children, because I'm active in a variety of extracurricular activities, because I'm happily married and want to stay so, I don't want to take the next step in training. In fact, that doesn't make sense at this point of my life in order for me able to do that. Well, there's a consequence for that. And that could be, well, as opposed to having 2 car payments, I can only afford 1 car payment. As opposed to a vacation to Florida, it's a camping trip to the North Woods of Wisconsin.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, awful.
That's the worst,
It's terrible where we live.
Gosh, yeah.
Right? So I think we need to change what it is that we actually need. And really, Jake, I think the tension is much more of, oh, I want everything at work and I want all the money that comes with work. And yet, oh, I want a great marriage, and oh, I want great children, and I want great involvement and lots of friends. I want. And yet, just like in what I do for a living in program management, where there's trade-offs that happen between scope, schedule, and time, well, the same thing happens in our real relationships in our life. And if I don't invest well in my wife, then how can I claim to be happily married, or why should I expect to be happily married? I don't. So there is a balance for sure, and absolutely that has to be maintained if there's going to be any type of significance. And I think that would be the other point, is that success at the end of the day, as you indicated, is an ever increasing bar. And typically we orient it incorrectly. There's too many people who have arrived at the top of the ladder or the top of the pyramid and saw that it's empty upon their reaching it, and nobody ever told them. And instead of success, perhaps we should be measuring our lives as in a manner of significance. And significance can only come from investing in growing other people as opposed to achieving things.
Even as you say that, it's something that I've been trying to do in my life, and it's led to like differing decisions where I think in the end, I think I'll be happy with where I've gone, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to do like what I feel called to do. And that sometimes calls for dramatic decisions, or like what the world would consider to be like dramatic decisions. But at the end of the day, like, you know, once again, like my sense of like what satisfaction looks like is, you know, once again, like I'm always constantly thinking about legacy and like the legacy I want to leave behind. And I think for myself, that looks a lot like, how did he affect the people around him? And like, was he pouring into the people around him, and are they like positively impacted for him being in their lives, and that kind of thing. And I think that's like one of the things that drives me. So then I'm a lot more, even as an introvert, I'm a lot more people oriented and trying to invest in them. And then like seeing my vocation as kind of being like, at least right now, as I'm still like, you know, applying for like different jobs to actually do a vocation. But my like current job is just a way to like meet my financial needs, so that I can actually do what is important to me. And like, yeah, like at times like it's stressful, I think financially, and at times it's like stressful, like knowing that I don't want to do this long term, like, and like this is just for a season, recognizing that this is just for a season. But I think, yeah, once again, long term, this is going to prevent me from, you know, having that midlife crisis, because I can look back and say, yeah, like I was doing what I know I was supposed to be doing at that time. At least I'm hoping I'll be at that case. You know, we'll look back on this in 20 years or so, and we'll see how I'm doing. If I'm living in a van down by the river, which now is actually a goal for a lot of people. It's
a cool thing. That's right.
That's right. Actually, it was your goal for a little bit.
A successfully accomplished goal.
You did. Wait, okay. Side tangent, real quick. So one cool thing about Derek is that he did, in fact, convert a bus into a home for him, his wife, and his 4 children, and their dog, whom he loves a lot. And how long were you on the road?
Not only did we successfully convert, but then we proceeded to sell our home, the bulk of our possessions in that home, and then hit the road for a 6-month period of time where we traveled down all throughout Florida, spent primarily the winter, and then en route to California in the great state of Texas. We broke down in San Antonio in a way that ended our trip as the supply chain prevented us from being able to repair it quickly. But we did, in fact, spend 6 months in a converted bus traveling the country.
Because then you're able to like continue. This was like specifically, not specifically as a result of COVID, but like COVID helped with this decision.
It did.
But you're also able to have the benefit of being able to work from home. Or in this case, your tour bus, insert eye roll on my end. But like, how cool is that? Like that we're at a point that we have the technology to potentially work from home and have that home being like a bus that you can just cruise around the country with. But yeah, okay, side tangent over. I think it's just really cool, and I love geeking out about it. You know what? No, side tangent is not over. It's just so cool. Like all this. Okay, so you had to do a lot of this. You did all this stuff pretty much yourself, including the electrical, plumbing,
every bit of it.
Setting up the power supplies and all of that. And you made some of us help you, at times. But let's be real, we enjoyed it once again.
You did.
But like, where did you pick up all these things on top of all the other stuff that you had to learn for your job now? Because that's like the same question I have for like my dad, who was raised on a farm, went to pharmacy school, is like certified as a pharmacist, is practicing that full time for like the last who knows hundreds of years. Okay, sorry, Dad. But has all this like technical know-how on all these things, and I'm like, Dad, how do you know all these things on top of like your primary job? But in this case, Derek, how did you pick up all this stuff?
One of the really great things about the internet is the ability to get information from other people who have done something that you haven't. And despite the fact that I'm handy and have a bunch of tools and got to buy a whole bunch more tools in the process of building this bus, I just followed people on YouTube who had done something similar, and between watching them, knowing or kind of knowing what my next step was going to be, and then I would go forward and just try something. And oftentimes that worked. Oftentimes it didn't work and it had to be redone. So everything from figuring out how to tear out all the wires in my bus, to painting the outside, to doing the framing for the walls, through figuring out how to put and squeeze a stove through and wire up the propane tank from underneath, to installing solar power so that we could be completely off grid. All of it was done. And in the past, when I was a kid, if we didn't know how to do something, we'd go ask our dad or we'd go ask grandpa. Mm-hmm. And in this case, they were wholly inadequate in order to be able to help because they had never built a bus before. Yeah. And even though my dad had built sets at NBC Studio, he has no idea how to frame out a bus or how to install solar panels, and right. So it was tons of knowledge-based learning and crowdsourced learning that was just awesome and allowed me to. And I think when I talked before about likability, about motivation, and about results, right? Like this was pure motivation in order to be able to do this, and not being. I think the thing that I learned the most was. The project of construction was about 8 months, and I worked tons and tons of hours on it in the week. I would get up in the morning.
Hours, and then I specifically remember that Jace, your son, also worked a lot of hours.
He did.
Doing stuff he probably didn't want to do.
And getting yelled at. True. Just like I used to do. I used to get yelled at by my old man.
Yeah.
But tons of hours in doing all that stuff. But I was relying on pure motivation, and I wanted to quit 1,000 times. And so it really taught me just the ability to focus down on something small that I could turn into a small achievement, so that I didn't, at the end of the day, just light the thing on fire or blow it out or try to sell it because I was so depressed about how little progress I was actually making and how much I underjudged how much work it was actually going to be.
Okay.
YouTube.
Oh,
You can learn everything on YouTube.
Everything from YouTube or a podcast.
Or podcasts.
Someone could say. Anywho, that was enough plug about myself, I guess. I thought I had a quip. Oh, yeah. Basically, 8-month project, about to quit a couple thousand times. Just reminds me of whenever management starts trying to do something, for themselves, they're just like, oh, shoot, this is actually hard. Is that how you felt?
It totally is, and part of our pre-discussion, right? Like, totally. And I think that there's lessons in that, right? Like, because even in hardship, it's a season, and even when we're riding high, it's a season. And how can we look at events in our life like that in terms of seasons? Because we can't always control the outcomes, and our outcomes aren't always just determined in very short duration, right? Like, we can't change things sometimes in a day or in a week. Sometimes they take months, and how to be okay in being uncomfortable long enough for that season to actually change into a different season is a great life lesson, not only for bus building but also in your career and work.
Yes. Well, that answers actually one of the questions I was going to ask, which is advice that you'd have for anyone entering your field. But on to the next question, as we're about to wind down here. Has there been a life lesson that you've learned recently?
A couple, and I'll do one. So I call it recognizing big forces. So sometimes when we want to do things, or we have an idea at work, or we have an idea for our lives, or we have an idea in an organization that we're involved and a part of, is sometimes there are bigger forces at play that we may or may not recognize that determine the success of failure of your idea. And so if you're able to see these big forces, then now all of a sudden, perhaps your suggestion could be in line with those or make sense according to those, because that's the way that the organization is moving anyway. As an example, in the current environment, there's very much a cry for electrification of everything. Electric vehicles, we're working on electric heating of water inside of TRANE. And so to suggest an idea that's counter to that, when the big forces in the direction of the company to move in that, would be a fool's errand. So how can you recognize the big forces at play and use those to your advantage in order to be able to capitalize on an opportunity or an idea bringing to fruition? It's often something that we don't think about. We generally just think it's, oh, this is a good idea, and the good idea will stand on its own merits. Not always true.
So, recognizing the big forces. How do you stay informed then of those big forces? What are some resources that you particularly use?
I think that number one, you have to know your industry and the customers and what it is that they really value. So that should be the starting place. But if you're not able to do that research, or that maybe that seems difficult, then ask your boss about what are the big things or the big pressures that they're facing that keep them up at night. Our bosses often think about things differently than we do, right? In our roles, as you're increasing in roles of responsibility, generally you're doing things that are very tactical. They're very transactional. They're very short duration in their nature. And those are intensely important for keeping the business alive and moving and going. But the strategic direction of the company is what your boss is thinking about, or your boss's boss is thinking about. And so they're much more in tune about the big forces at play. Maybe it could be a big force, like a bad CEO could be a big force. Maybe it's hey, there's new laws that are being passed that will affect your industry. Maybe it's you're in the restaurant, you work at a restaurant, and food delivery is starting to eat your lunch, or restaurants are in trouble financially because of COVID and they haven't recovered from that. I would classify all those as big forces that you can then, if it's troubling your boss, now you can think along those lines and perhaps some perspective on how the ideas that you come up with or what it is that you're trying to achieve align with those big forces.
At the end of the day, that just sounds like asking your boss, hey, so stuff is keeping you up at night. Can you tell me about it so that it can keep me up at night as well?
or it will allow you to be likable, motivated to do something about it, and then results oriented. So then you become your boss as opposed to
So you take his job.
Take his job. Nailed it.
Woo!
Nailed it.
That's what we want. That's what it takes to be hungry.
Humble and smart. There you go.
Yes. I think that's such a good mentality. Like, that's the mentality I hope to cultivate as well for myself, is just the concept of, like, having been in management at one point and, like, hopefully, like, trying to be a leader in different circumstances, is the idea of raising people to take over my position. So in such a way that, like, they're going to take over it and they're going to make it better than what I could have done. Same as, you know, raising kids, any type of leadership whatsoever. How can I pour into them so that they can then take over from me, and then I can move on to the next thing and then do the same thing over and over again. So basically, once again, the concept of legacy.
Absolutely right.
So
Yes.
speaking of that, what is the legacy that you want to leave?
Oof. Well, so by definition, I am a Christian, and so it's important for me that I lead a Christian home, that I raise my children in the knowledge and obedience of the faith, and that has a ripple effect through eternity. So I would say that's the first one. But then secondly, we have a saying in our family that we recite, that what is it we're trying to achieve as a family, and that we want to have fun, that we want to give thanks, we want to make wise choices, we want to say sorry, we want to speak life to each other, and we want to never quit. And so those are just a handful of things that we remind ourselves on a daily basis that we want to achieve. And so a real legacy would be that those things are passed on, and that my kids are passing those things on after I'm gone. And so I would look at that as a real marker of a legacy that's been passed on to the next generation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jarek, for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
This was super fun.
Always great to see you.
We go eat steak now?
Yes.
Yes.
Viewers, you're not invited. Sorry. Bye.